Let's begin.
Hello and welcome to Pods Above Replacement, part of the Padres Hot Tub Podcast Network. My name is Raphie Cantor. I am a host and producer of Padres Hot Tub. And joining me from the Mile High City, he just saw his shadow, so it's 6 more weeks of spring training. It's John Fracoda!
Don't wish that evil on me, Ricky Bobby. I think, I don't know if purgatory exists, but I think for me, if it does, it's just going to be me watching spring training baseball with no regular season on the horizon afterwards. That's just what purgatory would be.
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, hang on. Question, Groundhog Day. The actual thing, not the movie. Are you in or out? Do you think Groundhog Day is cool? Do you think it's dumb?
It's both. It's both cool and dumb. It's obviously dumb. There's no science behind a freaking groundhog seeing a shadow. But remember the past. That's fine.
It's tradition, which as baseball people we certainly love. But it is stupid.
It's obviously stupid. Baseball's stupid. I love baseball.
Baseball is stupid. So there we go. Okay, John. Well, let's get into it because we were talking before this. And we were like, what do we want to do an episode about? And we were also both remarking on the fact that you and I have physically watched remarkably little spring training this season, which I think makes us actually really good arbiters of what we should and should not take away from what happened. Don't you think?
Yeah, a little bloop double changes all of our opinions on, any of these players that are on the fringes of the rosters.
Yes. So, John and I are going to talk about what you missed in spring training this season from two guys who really didn't watch that much spring training, but we have gone through the numbers. And, this is almost like, I feel like the Billy Bean of Moneyball who's working out in the weight room and isn't watching the games because he doesn't want to make subjective decisions about these players. This is our Moneyball episode. We might as well be doing this.
We did this for
press.
you guys. We intentionally didn't watch at great stakes. We wanted to watch so bad, but we didn't.
Yes.
Just for you, the listener. I hope you're proud of us.
So there's 3 things that we really want to talk about. We should also note that we're recording this on the morning of Sunday, March 23rd. The Padres have 2 remaining spring training games. Some roster moves have been made. Not obviously the full picture hasn't come to fruition yet. So we just want to talk about the 3 things that are the most interesting to us in terms of spring training, how they influence what will be happening on the 2025 Padres, and whether or not the team is or is not making the right decision around that, which is a little gobbledygook, but basically this goes back to that age-old question of, does spring training really matter? And I think for these 3 positions, the answer is going to be yes, John, don't you think?
I guess it's, if you have some sample size, it's better than no sample size, but this sample size is still a small sample size.
Yeah. So let's just get right into it, and we'll talk about a position that has truly vexed the Padres. I want to say, since it came to fruition in the National League, which is the designated hitter role. The Padres have never really had a stalwart DH. They've had a lot of guys who have cycled in. There was the whole, it's going to be a good opportunity to get guys off their feet, which I think in certain articles has basically been proven as being not a thing. But they've never really had a guy who just hits, despite there being guys on their team who probably should have been guys who just hit. But this season, the Padres are looking to play a pretty strict platoon, it would appear, at designated hitter. And the question of who is going to occupy the left-handed side of that platoon, be it Gavin Sheets or Tirso or Nellis, was a hot topic in Peoria and on the Padres Hot Tub Discord over the last several months. And it appears that we have something of an answer going into the season because the Padres selected the contract of Gavin Sheets, putting him on the 40-man roster. And in a somewhat corresponding move, they optioned Tirso Ornelas to minor league camp. Tirso Ornelas, of course, still has options, which plays a part in this conversation. So, John, what do you think the Padres are thinking with this move?
Yeah, so I'm going to make the Padres case and see why ye of little faith think that it's not a great case, okay? So there is a case for Gavin Sheets going forward. He started off, I mean, this is a huge thing for, I feel like, AJ Preller, when he's getting these roster periphery guys, is like, for some reason it matters a lot when they were drafted how skilled or talented they were, and he's just trying to reverse engineer that original talent into a now successful baseball player going forward. So he's a second round pick. You know, he had some esteem coming out of the draft. He put up a 123 WRC plus in his first year in the majors, and then he kind of fell off after that, also playing for horrible teams. He has a below average K rate, so that means that he has something that he can trade. He can afford to take more early, like, hard swings during his at-bats because, you know, his K rate isn't that high anyways. If he falls behind, he could potentially still make contact. He has a really good Z contact for a power hitter, so when the ball is in the zone, when he swings, he's probably going to make contact, but he doesn't swing very often when the ball is in the zone. He doesn't swing at meatballs even close to the major league average. He also doesn't swing at the first pitch even close to the major league average. So to me, when you're not swinging, despite the fact that you have the talent to make contact on balls in the strike zone, especially early in the count, then you're falling behind in the count, which is never good for a hitter. So is he entirely dissimilar from the change that Profar made last year? He's not entirely dissimilar. There's things that he could do that are a little bit similar to how Profar made more and harder contact. He can swing more early in the pitch when he has a good fastball that he can hit. He can make sure he's not falling behind. He can swing at meatballs, be a little bit more selectively aggressive, like our hitting coach is always like trying to say that you need to be selectively aggressive within the strike zone and not be waiting for walks. He has about a league average K rate and about a league average walk rate, so he can afford to sacrifice a few walks and strike out a little bit more if that's what he needs in order to make harder contact. So a guy who is, you know, talented. He's now, I think, 28 years old. He can hit the ball hard. He can make he can make contact at a reasonable rate. Maybe with our hitting coach, what he's going to do is be a line drive hitter who works his way into power by finding good pitches early in the strike or early in the count.
Yeah, so I think first of all we should take a look back at who these guys are, what the tape on them is thus far, and then we can kind of look at this year's spring training and see how all of those things meld into a decision that the Padres have made. It's worth noting that Gavin Sheets, when he was drafted in 2017, he was already 21 years old. He was a college bat. He went to Wake Forest. He signed for $2 million. So, like you mentioned, second-round pick, 49th overall in the 2017 draft. This was a guy who clearly the White Sox thought was going to be an anchor in their lineup at certain points when they were dreaming on the upside of this guy. He goes through the White Sox minor league system, and he hits at all levels for sure. Over the course between 2017, he puts up a 122 WRC plus in the minors. That's at rookie and low A. 2018, he goes to high A. He puts up a 123 WRC plus. 2019, he goes up to double A, puts up a 122 WRC plus. 2021, he goes to triple A, puts up a 131. He is someone who was relatively consistent, but I think that this is key for a guy who was drafted to be a slugger. Until he got to AAA in 2021, that entire run throughout the minors, 2017 through 2020, he never slugged over 415, ever. He was a guy who, surprisingly was hitting for average, and was putting up high on base percentages, somewhere, the 350s, 360s, et cetera, but he was not really a slug guy. Now, 2021, is this sort of magical year for Gavin Sheets where everything comes together. I'll give you his scouting report before the 2021 season from Fangraphs, in which they labeled him a 40 value prospect. This is a classic quad A prospect ranking. And this is what Eric Longenhagen had to say in 2021. Quote, a player dev employee from a team that saw a lot of the Sox during the fall echoed the thoughts I've had about Sheets' swing basically since he was drafted. He too often slices down at the baseball, and he can get only to his considerable raw power in certain parts of the strike zone. He does have good bat control and makes mid-flight adjustments to breaking balls, which he has the raw strength to punish even if the timing of his lower half has been compromised. He's a good hitter, just one I'm skeptical will clear the offensive bar at first base without trading some contact for power, which hasn't happened yet. He got some run in the outfield during instructional league, and if he proves capable of playing there, then he belongs up in the Gonzalez-Rutherford area. I don't know who he's talking about. If you stand back and take a bird's eye view of the profile, this is a 24-year-old who hasn't slugged over .415 in pro ball yet, and now occupies a 40-man spot on a club that has several other hitters just like him. End quote. So, this is a 2021 scouting report. Gavin Sheets goes to AAA in 2021. He starts to slug for the first time in his career. In 254 plate appearances, he slashes 295, 362, 507. It's a 131 WRC plus. Starts to see some market improvement. He gets called up to the major league team, and then in 179 plate appearances with the Chicago White Sox, he slashes 250, 324, 506, puts up a 123 WRC plus in a limited run in Chicago, and the White Sox are thinking, holy crap, okay, we've got a 500 slugger on our team now. He is the Prince who was promised that we were hoping when we drafted him from Wake Forest in 2021. And then basically the rest of Gavin Sheets' career happens, which is that in 2022 through 2024, he gets to get significant playing time with the White Sox, and I'm just going to do a cumulative add up of those 3 seasons. During that time, he has 1,255 plate appearances. He only puts up 35 home runs in those 3 seasons, and he slashes 227, 291, 368. That is an 84 WRC plus from a man who has no defensive value whatsoever at all. Basically unplayable. He accumulates negative 2.2 FWAR in that 3-season span, and he is let go by the White Sox after the 2024 season, only to be snatched up by AJ Preller and the Padres on a minor league deal. So we're going to talk about Tirso in a second, but John, you told me that the Padres think this guy is the answer to their problems. I'm looking at this tape. What the fuck?
Yeah, it's so funny because I hadn't read until you just read it out loud. I hadn't read the scouting report because you put it on the document, and basically the things that I was just saying in terms of like what we could do in order to make him better is what this guy is saying in 2021 that he would have to do in order to be better. You know, trading his contact in order for more power to justify him being a first base / DH hitter, and it's like, okay, now we're in 2025, and my argument was like very similar to the same thing, that he needs to trade some of that contact for power and, you know, be a little bit more selectively aggressive within the strike zone. I mean, I still think that he could, you know, attack more pitches early in the count. That being said, is it going to be enough to justify being a DH? Do I think that he's going to have even a positive WAR, you know, after half a season? To me, that would be hard to say yes to.
Yeah, certainly. So let's get to Tirso really quickly and just get the tape on Tirso. So we've talked about Tirso Ornelas a little bit before on this show, not too much, because he hasn't really been someone that's been on the radar of getting significant major league playing time until this offseason. And Tirso is a known quantity for the Padres. He's been in the system since 2016 when he signed with the team, and, you know, obviously teenager out of Tijuana. So a lot of people would like the story of Tirso Ornelas to come to fruition. He's played at every level of the Padres system multiple times, and he's had varying results. You know, if you're watching this on YouTube, which again we encourage you to do so, you'll see his entire minor league stat line from Fangraphs up on there, and you'll see he has, you know, obviously limited sample size in each level, but you know, some years he hits, some years he doesn't. You know, he immediately comes to the Padres rookie ball system in 2017 and hits great, puts up a 127 WRC plus, and then he kind of struggles. And in the, you know, in 2019 across, you know, his entire minor league season and across multiple levels, he puts up a 67 WRC plus. No 2020 because of COVID. You know, 2021, he is in high A, hits 104 WRC plus. Okay, some improvement. 2022 comes right back and puts up a 96 WRC plus. And so it's just this kind of this wishy-washy thing until 2023 and 2024, he lands in AAA and he starts putting up above average numbers. And then obviously the thing that gets people's attention is that he has some high exit velocities that are north of 110 miles per hour, getting up to 114 at certain points. And that obviously is going to attract the attention of stat nerds like us in seeing the potential for Tirso Ornelas. And so now I'm going to read you Eric Longenhagen's scouting report on Tirso Ornelas that came out just last year, the end of 2024, which similarly to Gavin Sheets, he is rated as a 40 future value prospect. Okay, quote. Ornelas' swing has undergone several changes in an effort to help him get to his power in games. His surface stats at El Paso are impressive. He currently has an OPS near 900, is slugging over 500, and is on pace to once again set a career high in homers. But his minor league StatCast data suggests that's something of a PCL mirage. Shout out to Austin Hedges. Ornelas is more upright and isn't as spread out in his stance this season. He's also cut his strikeouts down to 17% and is still pulling the ball in the air at nearly the same rate as he did in 2023, even with the uptick in power output. He projects in a part-time outfield role similar to Billy McKinney's. End quote. Billy McKinney comp, John.
Classic DH that you want.
Yeah, so Tirso Ornelas, what's your take, John?
I mean, I honestly like the bat. I think I like the bat more than Sheets. I think that right now, if you made me pick the next, 200 at bats, who is more likely to put up solid numbers, at least this one is consistently doing the same thing, which is hitting the ball hard with low K rates. So like 200 times you have him hit a ball hard somewhere. It's probably going to be line drives and not that many home runs, but at least you know that it's not going to flame out. He's not going to probably come up here and hit under 200, and we're talking about how to replace him in 200 at bats. Whereas I think that that's a very conceivable thing for Gavin Sheets. I mean, damn, the guy was just cut by the White Sox, worst team ever, last year. At the end of last year, because even they couldn't see a path forward for him. So I like it more over the next 200 at bats or whatever, and I also don't think that you could justify putting him in DH. If you could get a serviceable left field out of him, then suddenly it's, a guy that could be valuable in some capacity. But at DH, I don't know. Both of these options seem like some pretty poor options.
Yeah. So, about that, as you know, if you listen to the show, John and I are fans of the Zips projection system from Fangraphs, Dan Zimborski's proprietary system. And both of these guys have 2025 projections that do not inspire confidence for a designated hitter. According to Zips, Gavin Sheets is projected to put up a slash line of 233, 299, 372. That is good for a 90 WRC plus. Tirso Ornelas projected to put up a slash line of 241, 302, 373. That is a 93 WRC plus. I'm going to just say on balance, that's about the same dude. A guy who's going to slug somewhere between 372 and 373 as your designated hitter is not someone that I'm particularly inspired by. So, of course, Zips is only going off of all of the tape that we have just discussed. Zips does not know about what has happened in Peoria, Arizona in February and March of 2025. And what has happened is two guys who have both performed well. Both had good springs. But springs that were, let's say, slightly different in terms of one had what you would say is an optimal spring training for a guy who's trying to win a designated hitter job. One, not so much. So we're very fortunate in that because spring training is such a small sample size, you worry that one guy has played more than the other, and then, you know, that can screw up the numbers you're looking at. Gavin Sheets, Tirso Ornelas, both have put up 54 plate appearances at the time of recording. So they've had exactly the same amount of playing time, which is good for our purposes. And Gavin Sheets, in spring training in 54 plate appearances, has slashed 300, 352, slugged 700. So it's a 437 WOBA, a 161 WRC+. Tirso Ornelas has slashed 292, 370, 438, to 363 WOBA, a 114 WRC+. To be clear, very happy with to have either of those numbers at designated hitter. One thing that I thought was interesting is that Gavin Sheets put up a 7.4% walk rate and a 22.2% K rate, whereas Tirso Ornelas 11.1% walk rate, 11.1% K rate. So, that's going to be fueling his on-base percentage a little bit more, putting the ball in play a little bit more. But again, we're looking at basically nothing sample sizes on those slash lines. Do you glean anything from that, or should I just get to the more raw StatCast data?
I mean, very little. The only thing is that I see is Tirso has always had a relatively low K rate, and his K rate stayed even lower than it normally is. So that does make you wonder whether he can be at least kind of like a Donovan Solano type, in that he comes up and doesn't strike out a lot and puts the ball in play, kind of hard. Like I was saying before, Donovan Solano is also not a guy that I would necessarily love at DH, but you could kind of see a comp there.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's get to the some of the stuff that I think actually does provide some value in spring training, which is exit velo, hard hit percentages, launch angles, etc. Just raw contact data that is replicable over the course of a major league season. So Gavin Sheets and Tirso Ornelas both put up pretty similar exit velocity statistics if you look at average. So on average, Gavin Sheets put up a 91.5 miles per hour on average in his contact. Tirso Ornelas 91 miles per hour. But if you go a little bit more granular and look at hard hit percentage, and as a reminder for folks, hard hit percentage looks at the number of batted ball events that are over 95 miles per hour. Those are directly correlated to much, much, much better outcomes for hitters. So, high hard hit percentage, obviously, very good. Gavin Sheets has a 53.3% hard hit percentage in spring this year. Tirso Ornelas a 40%. What does that tell me? That tells me that Gavin Sheets is hitting the ball, that more of his contact is hard hit, whereas Tirso Ornelas is putting up a few really hard hit balls at high exit velocity, and that's bringing up his average. And he's having, more batted ball events that are below that 95 mile per hour threshold.
So I will say, just so everybody knows, this is seemingly 30 batted ball events for each of them.
Yes.
It's crazy how similar all of their stats are. It's like, in terms of like how many times they've had at-bats, plate appearances, batted ball events. But anyway, so you're talking about 30 batted ball events, and Gavin Sheets must have had about 17 of those 30 batted ball events at 95 or higher.
Exactly.
And
Tirso had 12.
Tirso had 12. So 5 fewer, 95 plus. But with a similar overall exit velocity, just like you were saying, so his, 95th might be higher. His 95th percentile one might be higher. Like when he's hitting it hard, he's probably hitting a little bit harder. And then just to put some numbers on this so we're not just out in esoteria, You said 91.5 exit velocity for Sheets and 91.0 for Tirso so far in those 30 batted ball events. Just as an example, Profar was 91.1 last year, which was wildly up for him over his career, like 87. So he had that great year, obviously, where he was hitting the ball really hard, and it's, basically the same as Gavin Sheets and Tirso have been doing in spring training. And then for hard hit percentage, Profar was just above 40%, I believe. Let's see if I can pull it up really quick. Yeah, 44.4%. So somewhere kind of right in the middle of Sheets and Tirso in terms of their batted ball events so far this spring training.
Just while you're there, do you also have his launch angle?
Launch angle for Profar last year was 13.4.
Okay, that's helpful because this is the last piece of data that I want to throw at you. These guys basically had really comparable launch angle numbers. Gavin Sheets, 16 degrees. Tirso Ornelas, 14 degrees.
Major league average is 12.3, and Tirso's thing has been that he's had relatively low launch angles his whole minor league career. So he's above average for those 30 batted ball events, which is dissimilar from what we've seen in the minors so far, and something that we were looking for.
Yes. So I want to you put down a looks like a results tree for someone's data through.
Sorry. This was just Gavin Sheets when it's basically, it's a lot of data, so I'm not going to be able to elucidate it via word, but the basic thing is that when Gavin Sheets falls behind in the count, he does much worse. Obviously, so does everybody, but just to put that data up and kind of correspond with what I was saying earlier, which was that he does not swing at the first pitch very often, and he does not swing at strikes nearly as much as he probably should. So him falling behind in the count is causing him to have poor numbers. So if he does get a little bit more, keep saying it, selectively aggressive within the strike zone early on in the count, he might have some more success. Gavin Sheets.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's put a button on designated hitter because this is like basically all of the tape that we can throw at you between these guys. And, you made the Padres case earlier. I think that at the end of the day, the Padres have a problem with left-handed slug. Basically, the only guy on their team who is projected to really slug from the left side of the plate is Jackson Merrill. And, you're asking, that's a lot of expectation to put on a sophomore who had an amazing rookie season, who was a highly touted prospect, but was a prospect who was touted as a bat-to-ball contact guy, not necessarily a guy who's going to hit the lights out of the stadium. And the version of Gavin Sheets that is the upside version of him, where you've basically taken the scouting report and John Prakota's scouting report and traded some of that contact for power, which I'm sure is something that Victor Rodriguez has been working with Gavin Sheets on. And it's hard to say from 54 plate appearances, but he certainly slugged in Peoria in this February and March. That is the Gavin Sheets that they are dreaming on. That's the Gavin Sheets that they're saying, we think that there is something within this man that we can get that can fill a gap on this team. Unfortunately for Tirso Ornelas, the Padres have Luis Arraez. The Padres have Jake Cronenworth. They have guys who they are hoping and expecting to get left-handed contact from, and they need slug. And, if it appears that A.J. Preller and Josh Stein and all the guys in the Padres front office think that we have a left-handed slug problem, who is more likely to solve that problem? Who's more likely to remedy that? Do we think it is Gavin Sheets or Tirso Ornelas? And yes, there are, contract implications. Gavin Sheets could have opted out, and Tirso Ornelas has options, and you can just keep him in El Paso, and yada, yada, yada. But I think at the end of the day, if the Padres thought that Tirso gave them a better opportunity to get left-handed slug than Gavin Sheets, they would have brought him up to the team. They didn't, so I don't think that they believe that. So at the end of the day, I think that that's where they're at. Anything to add on that before we move on to our next position?
Yeah, what would you do?
It's a really difficult question. I'm one of those people who is a sucker for the Tirso Ornelas story. And would love to see a kid from TJ come up and do well. There's also again, this is maybe a little bit of sunk cost fallacy as well, but the Padres have invested in Tirso Ornelas, and like, what do they have to show for it at this point? Like if you're not going to give him a crack now, like, when are you going to give him a crack? But I don't know, man. It's hard for me not to look at what I just said about left-handed slug and think that if you think you can get that from Gavin Sheets, you kind of got to see, because if you can just throw him away if he doesn't end up slugging for the team, and then what you're going to get in Tirso Ornelas. But if you option Gavin Sheets and then he opts out, you're never going to get an answer to that left-handed slug question with guys you have on the team. How do you feel?
I'd go, okay, I have a weird reason, but I would go Tirso, and one of the reasons why is because it feels like what this is it's like, all right, we have Gavin Sheets and we have Tirso. If Gavin Sheets doesn't work out, we could always just go to Tirso, whenever we want. However, the data of players going to Coors Field suggests that whenever you go to Coors Field, you perform very well at Coors Field, and your numbers are much worse on the road because you get used to certain pitch shapes, you get used to how the ball travels, you just become a slightly different hitter when you go to Coors Field. So like Nolan Arenado is much more likely to be great at Coors and horrible on the road when he's playing for the Rockies, whereas if you put him on a different team, he'll be slightly better at home and slightly worse on the road, but like closer, the differences between those will be closer and suggest the same quality of hitter as the hitter that's in Coors. Obviously, it's the same guy. So when we put Tirso down in AAA, where he's already maxed out what he's going to be at AAA, and now he's seeing pitches with bad shapes and cranking balls and getting that kind of confidence, and then he comes back up into the majors, in May because Gavin Sheets was terrible, then now he's not used to the nastiness of the major league pitchers anymore. I'd rather have him be on the same schedule as everybody else at the major league level during spring training and then come to Petco and see what he's got. Whereas now I think that by putting him in AAA, you could be ruining his whole season.
Yeah, absolutely. So a gamble that AJ Preller and the Padres have taken, and we'll see how it plays out. I want to kind of speed run through this because, we were originally going to do a Jason Hayward, Connor Joe episode, and then that quickly became not very interesting because you kind of know who these guys are, and, maybe Jason Hayward is completely cooked, but again, it's spring training. Who's to say how much effort, what is he, 36? 36-year-old, 35-year-old, whatever he is at this point, is putting in. Yeah. So, I don't know if there's really that much to be gleaned. But there are people who are talking about Oscar Gonzalez. Oscar Gonzalez, who had the best spring training of anyone on the Padres. He, similar to Gavin Sheets and Tirso Ornelas, got a lot of playing time. 34 batted ball events for him, which in spring training is a lot. And he slashed 500, 765. It's a 589 WOBA.
So something concerning about that.
Yeah. That actually, that incredible slash line actually portends Oscar Gonzalez's major flaw, which we'll get to in a second. But look, he far out hit Connor Joe and Jason Hayward, who of course played less than him. Their sample sizes are basically meaningless. So I don't really know how much to get into, but I'm just throwing up some stuff on screen so that you can see. Oscar Gonzalez led the Padres with an average exit velocity of 96.4 miles per hour. That's average. So an incredibly high exit velocity on Oscar Gonzalez, 57.6% hard hit rate. That is also not surprising. And slightly below average launch angle at 10 degrees. But look, Oscar Gonzalez had a really good spring. And I think that there are people asking questions about whether or not this guy deserves a look. The Padres, he is a right-handed hitter. Obviously, we're going to need a right-handed side to that designated hitter platoon. Connor Joe, Jason Hayward. Connor Joe's going to be playing some first base, it seems, at times. Does Oscar Gonzalez deserve a look? And for people who aren't familiar with Oscar Gonzalez's story, he was someone who got some time in Cleveland at the major league level in 2022 and 2023, and he had one of the most fascinating back-to-back seasons I've ever seen in a major league player, which is that he put up 1.4 FWAR in 382 plate appearances in 2022, and then he came back in 2023, and he put up exactly negative 1.4 FWAR. So he completely erased all of his value from 2022 in 2023, and then went to the Yankees organization in 2024, did not come back to the major leagues, had a whatever year in AAA with the Yankees, and now here he shows up with the Padres, smacking the crap out of the ball. Connor Joe, Jason Hayward, these are guys who are, I would say, known quantities. Over the last 3 seasons, Connor Joe put up a 96 WRC plus. Over the last 3 seasons, Jason Hayward put up a 101 WRC plus. Jason Hayward specifically mainly being anchored by a very good 2023 with the Dodgers, in which he put up a 120 WRC plus over 377 plate appearances. So, when we look at who projection systems might think that these guys are, Oscar Gonzalez and Connor Joe both projected to put up 97 WRC plus in very different ways. Oscar Gonzalez is projected to slug over 400, but put up an on-base percentage of 287.
Oof.
And Connor Joe, meanwhile, only projected to slug 375, but projected to put up an on-base percentage of 326. And the reason for that, and Oscar Gonzalez's spring training numbers actually glean this, because this is a guy who hit 500 in spring training, and his on-base percentage was 500. He doesn't walk.
Okay. Hold on. I want to correct it because I read it the same way. But you did on batted ball events on this. So actually he had, I think, one walk on the... No worries at all. I think he had one walk in the spring training. His actual numbers were 400, 431, and 564 overall. Not just on batted ball events.
Okay,
so,
thank you.
They're all similar, but he had one walk. So give him credit for his one walk, okay?
Yes, he had one walk. Yeah. Oscar Gonzalez doesn't walk. He never walked in his major league career. Even in his really good 2022 season, he had a 3.9% walk rate. 2023, that went down to 2.8%. Does not walk. He doesn't strike out a ton. He has a career MLB strikeout rate of 21.5%. But that means he's putting the ball in play a lot, and that his quality of contact is kind of whatever. So, is Oscar Gonzalez getting you to ask questions about left field DH at all, or do you think this is nothing burger?
I just don't get what you can get out of somebody who doesn't walk. Like, there's so few successful hitters that literally don't walk. Eventually, you just learn to get them to chase out of the strike zone, right? I would venture that the reason why he was successful at the beginning of his career is because people didn't know at that point that the scouting report on him was to make sure that you don't let him get good contact on the ball, because he's probably out there swinging early in the count, trying to hit the ball as hard as he can, find the first fastball that he can over the middle, and just, torch it. And that's basically been what Victor Rodriguez's approach has been, is like selectively aggressive early in the count. But he already does that. So what is the thing that we're going to change about him? Like, he's clearly not walking more this spring training. He has this one walk. And so what? He's just going to crush baseballs at all times. And at best case scenario, I see that pitchers don't know him very well in the National League, and he puts up like a Franmil Reyes type first half and then falls off in the second half. That's like the best case scenario. And worst case scenario is pitchers immediately realize, don't throw this guy a strike until you're down 3-0 in the count, and it'll probably work out. He'll probably still be down 1-2 because he's going to chase everything.
Yeah. And just to put some numbers to that, because I hadn't gotten to a StatCast page yet. This is great. So his career chase rate, Oscar Gonzalez, in 2022 and 2023 combined, 47.3%. MLB average is 28.5. Okay.
Yeah, so you don't have to throw him a strike at all.
You don't have to throw him a strike at all whatsoever. Okay. And, you add whiff to that. And, in both his seasons, he had an above average whiff percentage. Like, he becomes kind of unplayable at the plate. So he's a guy who smacks the crap out of the ball. But, even in spring, we didn't really see like a ton of increase in his plate discipline. So
do you remember Jorge Alfaro is like the guy that everybody is just like was all so excited about when he first came up through the minors because he could hit the crap out of the ball, but he had a chase rate that was insane. And his chase rate in the majors overall was 45%. And that's, and he has better batted contact than Oscar Gonzalez does. So like he's Jorge Alfaro who can't catch.
Yeah, and as a reminder for folks, Jorge Alfaro was throwing out the first pitch of the Padres playoff series because he didn't have a job. Yeah. So, I think it's worth keeping that in mind. So I said I wanted to move quickly.
One more thing though for him is that he also doesn't have platoon splits that you would like want. He's actually better against right-handed hitters than he has been against left-handed pitchers so far. He has a 79 career WRC plus against left-handed pitchers and a 109 WRC plus against right-handed pitchers. So you don't even get to like put him in the short side of a platoon and just like have him, rake lefties. In fact, he's worse against lefties. So I don't even know what to do with him in that standpoint either.
Yeah. So, I think Oscar Gonzalez is a classic case of a guy who had an amazing spring training, but unfortunately does not have use to the team for which he had a great spring. I hope he gets a banner in Peoria that will live on forever. But my personal take is that Oscar Gonzalez is not going to have impact on the 2025 Padres. John, do you disagree, or should we move on?
If he does, it'll be for a month. I do not think that he'll have a long-term beneficial, Padres outcome. He'll probably end up with a Padres F4 below 0.5. That's what I would say.
Okay, so I'm gonna pass you the rock in a second, John, because it's time for you to cook. Because the Padres have had some significant attrition in their starting rotation since we last spoke. Yu Darvish is gonna start the season on the IL. Matt Waldron's gonna start the season on the IL. And all of a sudden, the vaunted pitching depth that we were so excited about for the 2025 Padres is being immediately tested. And immediately tested by three guys, really. Three guys going for 2 rotation spots. Kyle Hart, Randy Vasquez, and Stephen Kolek. So, John, take us through. What are we awaiting as the Padres enter the 2025 season?
This is so I'm just going to go in order of like who we know the most, and I feel like we know Randy Vasquez the most, Stephen Kolek the second most, and then Kyle Hart the least. So it's funny, when I was like going over this with you before the start of this podcast, you were like talking about how later today you're going to do what you expect out of the Padres, like what you expect their record to be. And I feel like all I did was put up data. I didn't even like put up my conclusions to the data, and you immediately just read the data and was like, "Oh man, it's gonna be hard for me to put as high of a number as I thought that I was gonna put before the day started." So just warning out there, trigger warning for bloomers. There's some things that are not super exciting that I'm about to share. First with Randy Vasquez, there's some exciting stuff overall, but the beginning of this is pretty horrible. So we've known this whole time that Randy Vasquez cannot get left-handed hitters out. It's been a huge problem. His slash line against left-handed hitters last year was 365, 421, 539. And if you think that was due to like batted ball luck, it wasn't. He actually gave up more homers to right-handed hitters than left-handed hitters. It's just that he struck out literally nobody, and he had poor contact, and he has no whiffs when it comes to left-handed hitters. So left-handed hitters just rake against him. We were thinking about this in a prior episode of, what's he going to change? How is he going to be different this year? And we speculated on adding new pitches, adding new shapes. And it does seem like he has something that he's changed. He is going primarily to a cutter changeup look against left-handed hitters instead of a four-seam changeup look that he was using before, which makes some sense because his four-seam fastball against left-handed hitters gave up at a batting average of 432 and a slug of 682 with an expected slug of 794, which is even higher than the 682 that he gave up, and an xwOBA of 549. All of those are like insane. That's, better than Barry Bonds at the height of his steroids career. They're just, you can't get by with a four-seam fastball.
Alleged steroids career.
Alleged steroids. Oh, I'm sorry. I know that there's a lot of Barry Bonds apologists on our Discord. Famously Padres-friendly player. So you can't give up a 549 xWOBA to left-handed hitters and expect anybody to not beat you if they have a couple left-handed hitters in their lineup. So he did change to going to a cutter, which he only in quotes, gave up a 364 xWOBA to left-handed hitters with his cutter last year, which is still bad, but not horribly bad for a primary pitch against the side of the plate that you're worse against. So he did do more of those. The problem, though, is that just like his four-seam fastball, in fact, even worse than his four-seam fastball, he doesn't get any whiffs on his primary pitch. So his four-seam fastball against left-handed hitters had a 17.8% whiff percentage last year, against a major league average overall on pitches of 25%. And on his cutter last year was 11.9%. So he basically is never missing any bats with his cutter. And I mean, he's giving up better or worse batted ball contact. So better for him, batted ball contact with his cutter, but still not great, And you just look at the whiff rates. There's literally not a pitch that is above 17.8, his four-seam fastball, against left-handed hitters. So it's four-seam fastball 17.8, changeup 13.5, curveball 13.7, cutter 11.9, sweeper 13.8, and sinker 10.7 against a major league average overall of 25%. So he had 3.57 Ks per 9 and a 1.98 whip against left-handed batters, and he didn't do that much to change what he's doing. In fact, you would expect to have an even lower K rate with the cutter than with the four seam. Maybe it's some better batted ball events, but what is he? I don't understand what the plan is here. I don't understand how it's going to get at least much better. Maybe it'll be slightly better, but he still doesn't have anything that's going to cause a whiff. He's never going to strike anybody out. You can just, even if his pitches are better, you can just foul things off until you get something to hit, because you're going to get something to hit because everything has poor batted ball events. So I don't see a manner in which he gets wildly better, because he had a huge, very obvious thing to attack, which is how well he can do against left-handed hitters. He's fine against right-handed hitters, still not amazing, but fine, and that's all we need out of a fourth or fifth starter is fine. And I don't see how he's going to be fine against left-handed hitters. He's just not. So, with that change from a four-seam fastball to a cutter, I do think there's going to be some improvement against left-handed hitters, not a ton. And last year he had a 4.87 ERA and a 4.70 FIP and a 4.90 xFIP. So even if you cut a little bit off of that and make him a 4.50 ERA guy, it's fine. I guess that's an acceptable outcome if you're getting decent amount of innings from a guy with a 4.50 ERA, but it's still not something, given how good his stuff is, that you're excited about. I would hope that there's at least a ceiling that's above that, and right now I don't see it.
Yeah, I had the tremendous displeasure of going to Randy Vasquez start last year. It was actually the Padres Hot Tub Suite game in which nice. Padres played the Blue Jays, and they lost 5-2. Randy Vasquez, actually, his final line on that game did not end up being that bad. I believe he only gave up one earned run in 5 innings, but he was in trouble basically every inning. And whenever lefties came up to the plate, it was literally just hold your breath. And I mean, just going through the data, seeing what we've seen so far this spring, Randy Vasquez is not a major league starting pitcher, and that's unfortunate for the Padres because they're gonna have to play him, it appears. I don't really see what else their alternative is at this point. So the question is basically not if, but how much damage will be done when he is playing and starts for the Padres, and how many innings can the Padres soak out of him, because that's basically what you're going to need. I mean, even if Yu Darvish or Matt Waldron, have miraculous recoveries, they're starting the season on the IL, so it's going to be at least 2 weeks. So at least 2 turns to the rotation that you're going to have Randy Vasquez. And the question is, do the Padres stand a chance to win those games? I mean, it's really it is that bleak, because, if I'm an opposing manager, I'm putting six lefties in the lineup and saying, go, have at it. So I'm pretty bearish on Randy Vasquez. And John, you said this is the guy that we have the most hope from, or just the most tape? Because you had him first.
Oh, that we know the most.
That we know the most about.
That we know. We have the most data on him. We've seen him the most times. I would not say he's the one that I have the most hope on. Although I just think that he's going to be basically who he was last year, which is like not untenable. You know, it's like 98 innings of a 4.87 ERA. It's somebody that helps, I guess, but you know, doesn't kill you. That I think he'll be slightly better than that with the cutter against lefties, but it's going to be a lot of dancing around, you know, a lot of people on base, and then hopefully the home runs don't come with a bunch of people on base. I mean, it's a 198 whip against left-handed batters. With you know, now it's going to probably be lower than a 3.57 Ks per nine. What all that is a bunch of batted balls in play. Let's cross our fingers and hope that they're hit at somebody on any given day, or at least in high leverage situations. It's like, oh my god. So that's gonna be just, you know, scary. It's gonna be terrifying the whole time. We'll see how it ends up, but I don't have a huge hope that, like, you know, it turns out he's been doing this thing that we haven't seen, and you know, now he's unlocked. I think that he's just gonna be slightly better than a, you know, relatively bad pitcher.
Can I just say quickly before you move on that according to the Padres schedule, his projected starts would come against the Cleveland Guardians and the Sacramento/Las Vegas Athletics. So tune in, folks, for Jose Ramirez batting against Randy Vasquez if you want to watch an early preview of the home run derby.
Draft him in your leagues now. You can always trade him after the 3 home runs against Randy Vasquez. All right, and then going on to Stephen Kolek. So this guy's he's such an interesting person. I mean, we've known him, obviously. He has what you know, are mostly ranked as 5 or 6 major league pitches, which is, you know, something that makes you qualified as a starting pitcher. But similar, although different, to Vasquez, he also has low whiff rates out of all of his pitches. But the thing that's more hopeful about him is that he also gets poor batted ball results, you know? And he did have a thing similar to Vasquez, where Vasquez was throwing that four-seamer that was getting rocked. Kolek was throwing a sweeper against right-handed hitters that was getting hit to the tune of a 557 xWOBA, so almost exactly the same as the four-seam from Vasquez. And it was just getting destroyed, you know, X slug of 857. So it seems like through his spring training results so far that he's dropped that sweeper and gone more like traditional slider against right-handed hitters, with so far better batted ball results at least. And so, you know, that's one thing that he can do that makes him a little bit better. But like I said, it's similar to Vasquez in terms of whiff overall. He had more whiff rate problems. He had 1 whiff in one of his spring training starts, 1 in one of them, and then the other ones weren't, you know, much more. And so overall last year, I believe his overall whiff rate was 21.1 versus a major league average of about 25. And now that he's going to the starting rotation, one would expect him to have a lower whiff rate, because now all his pitches are going to be slightly less nasty. He can't throw his fastballs quite as hard, his breaking balls quite as hard. And when you look at a list of starting pitchers, qualified starting pitchers, so names that you would know, who had a lower whiff rate than Kolek had last year, it's a who's who of just like, you know, guys that are, I mean, some of them are fine pitchers, but it's just like, hopefully the ball gets hit at somebody, you know, like guys like Austin Gomber, guys like Kyle Hendricks, guys like Javier Assad, Miles Michaelis, Martin Perez. They're not, you know, anything better than guys that you'd want in your 4th or 5th spot, which maybe that means that Kolek could be a guy that's in their 4th and 5th spot. I could see it happening. It's also, you know, he has to have poor batted ball results, which means that when you stack up a couple good batted ball results in a row, even if they're unfortunate, even if they're bloopers, he might give up, you know, more than average runs, you know, in a given inning, and this could blow up a whole game. But overall, could he be kind of like a Miles Michaelis kind of guy, where he's not getting a lot of whiffs, but he's getting a lot of poor contact, and he's throwing enough innings to justify him being, you know, a successful fifth starter? I don't know. He's only been worked up to, I think, 3 innings or 3 1/3 innings so far this spring training. So I don't know if he's going to be prolific enough to be valuable, because I think that his value is going to be based on, you know, a little bit of value per inning pitch. So he has to throw a lot of innings to be considered valuable from like a WAR perspective. I don't think he's going to be like a dominant pitcher for sure. But like Miles Michaelis, the last couple of years has put up in reverse order. So starting from last year, 2024, 2 WAR, 3.1 WAR, and 2.8 WAR, primarily because he's thrown 171 or more innings per season, and none of them have been great. But he's getting by with poor contact and low K rates because he has major league quality pitches, but nothing that's dominant. And Kolek has no put away pitch, so guys who can foul things off, guys who can extend an at bat, are never going to be afraid against Kolek because they can just keep going until they see the pitch that they want, and they're going to put balls in play. And we should at least line up at the start of the year have a good defense, so maybe that will help. That being said, I do think that his ceiling, if he doesn't have a strikeout pitch, which right now he does not, I do think that his ceiling is kind of lower, fifth starter or swing starter, and that could be valuable, but it's not super exciting.
Yeah. We'll talk about overall strategy with these three guys when we get to Kyle Hart. The biggest question I have about Stephen Kolek is that when he was coming out of the bullpen, he had a pretty decent, I wouldn't say incredible, but pretty decent velocity numbers. He was averaging 95, 96 on his four-seamer sinker. And my question is invariably whenever you start stretching a guy out and asking for more length, what's going to happen to the velocity? And if that 95 mile an hour fastball becomes a 93 mile an hour fastball, 92 mile an hour fastball, well, does its effectiveness completely go out the window? Does that slider, have a little less bite to it? How are the pitches degrading because you're trying to get quantity and not quality? So I don't have much more to say than what you've already said about Kolek, and let's just get to Kyle Hart. But it's again, I said this on the main show. If AJ Preller turns around and turns a Rule 5 pick last year into a credible fifth starter, like he truly is a magician. So,
and I will say that the thing that's different between Kolek and Vasquez especially is that they both have major league pitches that neither of them have a pitch that has whiff. So in that regard, they're very similar. The difference is that Kolek is like far and away better in terms of command. They both don't walk that many hitters, but in his ability to hit his spots, his command rather than his control, Kolek is better. And so you could see him attacking weaknesses of hitters if he's, that kind of smart guy, and, having a successful major league career just because he has major league pitches that he can spot in the weaknesses of hitters. So like that could be a major league player for multiple years. And then, like you said, if you get that out of a Rule 5 pick, if you get Miles Michaelis' career or something even close to it out of a Rule 5 pick, then amazing, great work.
Absolutely. Kyle Hart,
that's your transition to me.
Yeah.
Cook on Kyle Hart. Yeah, so Kyle Hart just had a start. I think it was it yesterday or 2 days ago where he gave up. I think it was yesterday. Okay, where he gave up like 6 runs in 4 2/3 innings or something like that. And the article that came out was Kyle Hart has a deceivingly good finish, which was from AC. And when AC has something that's like weirdly positive about somebody like that, I'm wondering, like, did somebody say like juice him up because we're gonna put him in the starting rotation and we want fans to be excited about it? So it's a weird article to say Kyle Hart has a deceivingly good finish about like a start in which he gave up 6 runs in 4 2/3 innings or whatever it was. But like I said, this is the guy that we know the least about. He does have some StatCast data, but I think he had like 3 starts or something crazy small in spring training, and not all of them even had StatCast data. So jumping to conclusions on any of it would be a little bit, crazy. The only thing to say is that he does seem to be a little bit more diverse in his pitching set than when we were talking about him before, because I didn't have this, good of stratified data. And that's that he goes sinker, slider, changeup, it seems like, to right-handed batters, which makes sense. Sinker, slider, changeup. And then more of a four-seam sweeper guy, almost turns into like a loogie against left-handed batters in that he's like trying to sweep it across and kind of attack them with that weird side-armed angle. But like I said, there wasn't that many starts from him with StatCast data, so I can't go into it too much. He did have a 30% whiff rate in that Cleveland game, which is very good, especially at his velocity. 25% is major league average, like we've been saying, and 30% will get you up towards like the top 10 or 20 starting pitchers in baseball. If he could keep that up, I don't think he could, but we'll see. I will say that he is the guy I think based on his profile, based on the fact that he hasn't been in even the minor leagues in America last year, he has this weird arm angle, he has some deception on it in his windup, that he reminds me the most of like Pedro Avila, in that he is a guy I would guess that is going to do better the less tape that is shown on him, and thus putting him into the starting rotation when people are specifically trying to figure out how to beat him might not be my favorite strategy. I'd rather have him come in the 7th and you're like, oh shit, I haven't even planned for this guy, so I don't know, what he's going to do, and he's going to come at me with this weird arm angle and I haven't prepped for it. And kind of the same way Pedro Avila had a really weird changeup, the shape on it was strange, and so if you haven't been practicing for it, then it's going to be successful against you, and then people are going to see it multiple times and then do better and better. And then you go over to the AL, and once again, people haven't seen it, so he's successful for Cleveland, and then starts to fall off towards the end of the year once people see it more. He is kind of like that, but except for instead of one weird shape pitch, he has a weird windup, and just hasn't had a lot of tape on him overall. So directly putting him into the starting rotation and directly having people get a bunch of tape on him and make plans and then share that with the rest of the league sounds sketchy to me. I feel like I'd rather have him be a long man or swing man, and have him face as many teams as possible, as few times through the lineup as possible, and in that way he would probably like mitigate the time in which he's going to fall off, because I do think there's a precipice that he's going to approach just because his stuff isn't that good. So putting him into the starting rotation would not be my favorite. If I were to choose, I would put him in at the swing.
Yeah, and this kind of gets to, excuse me, the questions that I have about how the Padres are going to deploy these 3 guys. And one of the things you talked about early on in this show is limiting Kyle Hart's exposure, because once teams figure him out, then his efficacy is going to go down. I'm wondering, posit to you, John, could Stephen Kolek and Kyle Hart make some sort of piggyback with one another, where you have a righty and a lefty? Kolek throws a little bit harder, Kyle Hart throws softer. They're guys who both, for Kolek, obviously he doesn't quite have the length built up, especially from being a reliever last year. And Kyle Hart, it's a question of, do you really want to let this guy bat? You see, hitters more than 2 times through the order, or even more than 1 time through the order. So, do you think that that's a viable strategy for the Padres for these first month of the season?
I could see it, but I wouldn't intentionally piggyback them, like come out with a plan of doing that every 5th start or something like that. I would rather just like use Kyle Hart at the time that you need innings, or at the time that you're winning or losing by 3+ runs, just because once again, if that keeps being your 5th starter, where it's like Kolek and then Hart, then what are you doing? You're prepping for Kolek and Hart in that given game. And so I don't know, 2 guys, each of whom could explode at any time to give up like 3+ runs in a given inning. Do I want, a bunch of innings of that, or would I rather see where we're at when Kolek is through 4 innings, and then, if it's a close game, go to the bullpen, the actual good guys in the bullpen, or if it's not a close game, then Kyle Hart is a good person for that scenario.
Okay. John, how do you think the Padres are going to weather this first few weeks of the season with the rotation?
I think it's going to be exactly in the order that I said. I think it's going to be Randy Vasquez and Kolek, and then actually no, that's what I think that it should be, is Randy Vasquez and then Kolek. I do think that deceivingly good finish thing made me think that maybe Hart is going to be in it, especially because they've been hiding his StatCast data like kind of a lot. Like they've not started him in games where StatCast data is available. It kind of seems like they want to hide his exposure, and that might portend to him being placed into the starting line or starting rotation at the start. So I think Randy Vasquez is in, and I'm going to go with Kyle Hart, who has pitched 4.2 innings at least, as the 5th starter, and then Kolek, who I think is maxed out at 3.1 as more of a swingman, but does make... Well, actually, no, I think that he gets optioned and stretched out. That's what I would guess.
Okay. All right. Well, you heard it here first, folks. By the time you listen to this, we'll probably have some sort of an answer. But that is what you missed in spring training this season from 2 guys who didn't watch any Padres spring training. So
can I give one more quick thing that I forgot to mention before when we were talking about it? Is that I just want to know from like a strategic standpoint. So it seems like last year we went with a lot more contact heavy guys and a lower K rate, and that made it such that we were putting more guys on the base, and when there's a runner on second, you know, it was more of a chance of a hit rather than a walk that could drive in the run. It seemed like kind of the strategy last year. And all these guys that are seemingly going into our lineup are kind of similar. Hayward and Connor Joe, both, they don't have high K rates. They have about average K rates. Connor Joe actually has a little bit of a higher walk rate, but also has a decent average. Hayward, his thing is that he hits a crap ton of ground balls. So is he going to, instead of striking out like Grisham and Nola would always do at the bottom of the order, just rack up double plays, and that's going to be incredibly frustrating. Like, that could be an outcome where like we're just getting pissed off because he just keeps hitting ground balls in those situations, running around first and third and one out, and we get no runs. Whereas Solano, like Donovan Solano, wouldn't necessarily have done that with his little bloops that would have been like a sac fly or a base hit. And so that's one thing. Is that going to be annoying? Like, are we trading strikeouts for double plays? And then the second thing is, Connor Joe is kind of the hitter that we've got that is the most similar, I think, to Profar in terms of his, like, what we could possibly do with his turnaround. Because Connor Joe actually has a high walk rate. So are we getting selectively aggressive with Connor Joe, who, is a relatively, like, he's an average major league hitter or whatever, but, like, if he is hitting, like, getting his pitch early in the strike zone or early in the count, he might actually be doing some damage. There is a way that Connor Joe ends up being good. And so he's the one that I'm most excited about, like, possibly, like, having a breakout year. I would put like a 25% chance on that or lower than that, but he's a guy that, like, you could see hope for just because he does have that walk rate, and so he can be selectively aggressive. I think that Hayward's going to hit into a bunch of double plays, and I don't think Gonzalez has more than a month in him.
Cool. Well, we'll see. I mean,
yeah. Did this impact your episode later today? Are you gonna positively, negatively? What do you think?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. It's funny. Depending on how fast that I can edit both of these things, like one might, I don't know which one's gonna be out first. But I don't know. I mean, like, it's hard for me to look at this rotation and think, like, be really optimistic about the Padres, but I was wrong before. I mean, like, last year's opening day roster was really weird, and like we had like Graham Pauley playing third base, so am I really gonna say that this year's team is worse than that? We didn't think that we were like Jackson Merrill in center field is gonna be a disaster potentially, and then it's like now we're like Jackson Merrill is a 5-WAR lock in center field, so stuff changes. But I don't know. Folks will have to tune in to see my prediction. Right. But I will. Let me say this: recording this has influenced it for sure. If you want to know how, you'll have to listen to the podcast hot tub later today. But John, thanks so much. I'm glad that we got to cover this. This has been another episode of Pods Above Replacement. Again, hope you're watching us on YouTube. Subscribe. This is obviously an episode that is enhanced. If you're a patron, you can watch this ad-free on Patreon. So check us out, patreon.com/Padres Hot Tub. But John, thanks so much for joining me today.
Have a good weekend. Have a good week, everybody. This is probably going to get out, I guess, early on in this week. So everybody, have a good week. Get excited for opening day. It's coming up soon.
All right. Go Padres.
Go Padres.